Let's take a minute to talk about ground beef.
Can you guess what the #1 way consumers eat beef in the United States?
It's actually ground beef.
That's right. And although ground beef sounds so simple, and it's an extremely complex category. And that's why we want to talk to you today about some facts within ground beef.
Let's start by actually looking at what makes up ground beef tonnage. Did you know that there's a whole segment of the beef industry that's dedicated to ground beef? In fact, when we think about the beef industry, we have mature cows, we have bulls, we even have dairy cows. What do we do with all of these animals?
Well, remember what I said? The #1 way people eat beef in the United States is ground beef. So you think about all the variation that we have coming in from these animals, it's still going to be within the ground beef category.
In fact, we have mature cows, we have bulls, we have dairy cows. We even import beef specifically for ground beef. And let me tell you, it's not the high quality beef that we're using in our ground beef trimmings. It is the lower quality imports that I'm talking about. And we want to take just a little bit to dive into what this actually looks like. So let's take a minute and actually explore what this category could look like.
All right, so first let's look at some examples that can go into ground beef. This one right here is from a mature animal. Notice that it's darker in color and there's really not that much marbling to it. Versus this piece right here is from an animal that actually qualified for certified Angus beef. Notice that bright cherry red color and there's lots of marbling in that short rib muscle. So you can see these two materials are completely different.
So what we're actually going to do is make a ground beef items. We're actually going to make an 80-20 blend. So we have about 80% of the mature beef that Diana just showed you a second ago. She showed you what that looked like. We're going to mix that with the fat source. And this fat actually did come off of a certified Angus beef carcass. And that's the way the industry typically works. We mix meat that came from a more mature animal with fat that comes off what we'd consider a fed cattle, younger animals. We mix these together and we're going to end up with an 80-20 blend.
So let's go ahead, we're gonna grind the lean first, then grind the fat separate, mix it together, and then get that final grind through so you can see what that product looks like. Notice how dark in color this lean still is, even though it went through the grinder one time.
Now we're gonna go ahead and grind up our fat to mix all of this together.
All right, now that we have these both ground, we're gonna mix the two together to create our 80-20 blend, and then we're gonna put it through the grinder one more time.
Now we're gonna go ahead and grind this for the second time through a finer plate. So now that we've actually ground this twice and mixed it with the fat, you can see how different it looks. It looks much brighter. That white really makes it pop, and it's very similar to what you'd see at maybe a retail store, or if you open up a package of ground beef at a restaurant. This is what you're going to be more accustomed to. Why is that?
And the key takeaway behind all this is that you don't know what's going into the grinder. That variation in lean source is huge. And you can't tell in that end product until you taste it. And that's where there's going to be a difference. And this is where our 10 specifications really come into play to make a difference between ground beef and certified Angus beef ground beef.
Like Diana said, we have 10 science-based specifications that our carcasses have to meet. One of them is that A maturity specification. Our cattle have to be 30 months or younger, and that is going to safeguard against some of the really dark colored lean that we used here today. We don't have that problem because we simply don't allow that into our program. But don't forget, we have 9 other specifications that our cattle have to also meet, including modest degree of marbling or more. That is also so important for ground beef flavor.
Add flavor, yes. And not to mention too, we also don't allow dark cutters, practically free of capillary rupture, giving us a more high quality, consistent grind every time.
So to wrap this all up into one simple message, ground beef, like we said earlier, is extremely complex. There's lots of variabilities in how it's sourced and how it's produced, but ultimately you need to make sure that you're providing your customers with the best high quality ground beef that you can.
But If you're using certified Angus beef, we have 10 specifications that make the product more consistent and the highest quality beef that you can possibly get.
So all you really need to remember is, if it's not certified, it's not the best.
And that's your Certified Angus Beef Meat Minutes.